Hello and welcome to Conversations in Close Protection with your hosts Chuck Randolph and Chris Story. Our goal is to engage the greater protection community, inspire innovative thought, and as always, continue the conversation around all things close protection. Let's see what the guys are talking about this time.
Good evening. Welcome to this Shop Talk edition of Conversations in Close Protection. My name is Chuck Randolph. Across the digital divide is the expeditionary, Mr. Chris Story. Sir, Mo, welcome to Conversations Close Protection. How you doing?
Sir Mo. Oh yeah, Mo's a great freaking breakfast place, man. Bay Area. It's freaking awesome. I'm feeling very expeditionary. I actually have been freaking expeditionary over the past freaking weeks or whatever. Yeah, it's I'm glad to be back in at home for 10 minutes.
Yeah, I think you've been on the road for what, at least a month?
Yeah, just shy of that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
A lot going on. I mean, we've talked about it. You can feel it in the air. People are excited. You kind of, maybe it's spring, maybe it's spring fever, but you kind of sense that, you know, people are getting ready. Like it's like shaking off the mildew and the frost or whatever and getting ready to get out there and start getting at it again.
Shaking off the COVID.
Yeah.
Although, wow, there are some, just as an FYI, some folks might want to shake off the COVID, 20, 30, 40, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I've seen some folks that have, some folks have managed it well and have jumped on like Donkey Kong and been really, really ready to rock. Other folks, not so much. So have gone the opposite direction. And I guess it depends on what your role is or what you're doing. But some people have taken advantage and some people have taken advantage. Good talk.
It's interesting. I was talking to a good friend of ours, both who, speaking of expeditionary, works in oil and gas, talking about COVID shots and vaccination and what's required to travel and maybe to go in and out of FBOs. And, it sounds like, wherever you fall on the vaccine or being vaccinated, having that air quotes here, yellow card or whatever the equivalent of that is for your vaccination is going to be very important moving forward as people start ramping up to get back out there and support again. Yeah.
No, I mean, everybody's in the starting gates. I mean, you see like you talked about earlier in spring, right? Everybody's kind of, I just got back from, Colorado and it's like hang out for 10 minutes and you're wearing a freaking, you're all bundled up and a, freaking beanie and a freaking puffer jacket, layers. And then 10 minutes later, it's freaking hailing. Then 10 minutes later, it's sunny outside. Then I get here, California, and everybody's in flip-flops and shorts. I'm like, I'm seasonally challenged at this point. But everybody's ready to rock, And I think everybody's ready. A lot of it is that we're seeing people that are just outside, right? Yeah. Which is different, right? And people are outside because winter is almost over, at least for most folks.
I was just talking to, as you know, we have Danny Kluski upcoming on the show. I was talking to him this morning at, it's like dark 30 for me. And he was saying, off mic, he's like, one of the reasons I love the Middle East is it's going to be like 95 degrees here. And I'm from Ireland and it rains and it's cold all the time.
Yeah.
So, and being from Seattle, I was like, I feel you, brother. I think it was 60 degrees here today and you would have thought it was 90 people running around in shorts and T-shirts and flip-flops. It'll rain tomorrow though.
Well, that's a funny thing is you see people doing that. You're like, hey, calm down. It is not that warm outside. Some folks are like just doing it live. You're like, whoa.
Yeah.
But hey, 'tis the season. It's getting pretty exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have been traveling a lot, Chris. I mean, what are I know occasionally we've been asked, we've been taking a litmus test or, the Kentucky Winditch from you and I in our travels at work. I mean, what are you seeing? Airports more full? Are you
No.
How are you seeing traffic? What are you seeing there?
Airports, awesome. I mean, I think the crazy thing is actually the other day, I'm not going to answer your question for a second. I saw a baseball game the other day. I was like, wow, this is so foreign, you know? I didn't actually, it was just a college game and they were playing, nobody in the stands. There was like 10 people in the stands. That was like, it seemed really foreign, you know? But when you get into the airport, like no lines, virtually no crowds, you know, the only time people kind of mass is getting on and off the aircraft. And then, you know, some airlines do it better than others, you know, like they're like, hey, your seats change because we're social distancing. I'm like, oh, that sounds awesome. Your seats change because we're packing them in. Those are different airlines. So
Yep.
we're going to be back to normal one way or the other here pretty quick, or whatever
I've experienced
the
both
next
as well.
normal is, you know?
Well, I love the one where like, hey, there's no middle seat. That's great. You have a little time. You can stretch out. You know, not every protector travels first class or business class. And if you're a supplier or a consultant, depends on who's paying the bill. So sometimes it's nice to have that middle seat. But then there's other times you're like, oh, wait a minute. I remember this. And I hated it then and I hate it now. And now I got to wear a mask.
Yes, I got the old, I was in the let's see, what do they call them? The spectator seats on the aircraft, which is just in front of the prison seats. And I was like, hey, can I move
Y
up?
class.
Yeah. And they're like, yes, we'll move you up to another window. I was like, nice. And then as soon as I scan in, they're like, oh, we need to give you a new boarding pass because it showed the wrong number. I was like, what do you mean? They're like, middle seat. I'm like, thank you so much. Of course, you're next to, you know, two other, you know, 200 plus pounders, you know, and you're like, I think you guys do this on purpose, but whatever.
It's interesting with COVID, you know, and we've talked about it on the show with a few folks. Just now having to plan for that as part of your advance or plan for that. You know, you and I were talking the other day. I mean, I don't know. I talked to you. We're like brothers. We were talking the other day about an op I'm working on now where we're you know trying to figure out how to remove some politically distanced folks from one nation to another nation that might be more politically friendly to them. And
politically distanced? That sounds like calling a homeless person unhoused. What in the hell?
Let's call these. Well,
God,
I got to be careful how I say all this, but
diplomatic, Chuck.
But as you and I were talking the other day, I mean, so one of the issues, you know, it's not so much about like, hey, we're gonna helo we're gonna bring a bunch of helos in and evacuate these people or do whatnot. I mean, some of the issues becomes now like, hey, you got to have a COVID test 72 hours before you hit the border. So, okay, so now that means you have to find a test. You have to have people who can administer the test. You have to provide the test. You have to hold in place. You have to prepare the border, get the border over, and then have another place for them to hold. I mean, you know, laugh or not. I mean, you know, post-pandemic, it's now part of the advance. You know, it's part of the planning process, and it makes it just a little more complex.
Well, I think one of the things that can help that is some of these places have COVID test at the airport. Right? So some of the major hubs have them, and I don't know what test you need to have accepted by whoever your, you know, whatever contract you're holding is. But it is pretty interesting that's how they're rolling, you know, there. But yeah,
well,
it's going to be a thing across the board, and as it changes and mutates, everybody's going to have to, you know, kind of adapt.
I was talking to a corporate team leader the other day, and she was telling me that like they buy tests in bulk, they take them with them, they require their full-time team and their supplier team to test on a regular basis while they're on the road to ensure. And if you hit hot, air quotes there, I mean, there's a way to like, we got to time you out and figure out how we're going to bring somebody else on. I mean, but again, this is not a political statement from you or I. I mean, it's a thing. It's something you now have to consider. And it's also, you know, it's a bit of a risk factor itself in terms of logistics.
Yeah. Yeah, no, across the board. I mean, and I don't know, I think the vaccine gets politicized and the mask gets politicized. That part's interesting. However, yeah, there's just a lot of considerations to go over in the protector space.
But I think that's the advantage for the protectors, though, is that we kind of are already in a place where, like, look, we know things are going to change all the time, and we know we're going to have to always alter our advance work based on the environment.
Yeah.
I was, we've talked to a couple folks on the show. I was talking to Klusky today, and, and he made a comment, and I don't want to foreshadow so much because it was a great interview, but he was like, hey, look, wherever you are, you're in somebody else's space and you have to operate in that space. So,
right.
I think one advantage for the protector and things like the pandemic is, like, we're used to rolling with the punches and figuring out, like, what do we got to do to survive and to move and facilitate here.
Right. Well, I think the main piece is, and I think we talked about this before, is really, it doesn't matter what your political beliefs are and where you stand. At the end of the day, as protectors, we're pretty much agnostic in terms of politics. And, unless you just, you're going to be with somebody that you align with, which is, potentially unlikely. So you're going to do your job anyways. And at the end of the day, too, the underlying piece is that we're here to mitigate risk. So, we know protectors who have kept themselves quarantined. So like you talked about, that corporate team that, somebody has to be on a jump team, whatever the case is, or you're in reserve for whoever, gets caught out. So there's there are plenty of opportunities to be successful, or to set yourself up for success, in terms of this. So, yeah, it's definitely the way we got to go.
Let me ask you something, Chris. I mean, I know you're in the training space too, when we're not on mic and we're not finding folks, to talk to, is part of a bunch of stuff that you're working on. I mean, how do we train towards the pandemic now? Do we, or do you say, hey, pandemic, you got to go figure it out? I mean, is there a best practice or a standard? I know we've talked about it on CEPLC before and some other places, but I mean, what are you seeing, or what are you hearing, or maybe better yet, what are you suggesting?
Well, I think we're all defining this as it goes, right? I mean, just similar to the CDC and similar to everybody else, push this button, what happens? Push this button, what happens? I think best practices, I haven't really seen anything that anybody else is doing, aside from following the government standard and government practices. It's just differences in terms of technology, what technology is used, what's preferred, what's believed in, this test versus that test, and then validity, right, and timelines. I think there's going to be a lot of value in, providers having their people tested, whether it's 24 hours, 48 hours, whatever that company policy is. I think having those tests and having a group of folks with the most preferred test, the ability to have, temperature checks right away. And again, like we talked about, it used to be, if you're able to provide hand sanitizer to your client, you were like, the service guru, right next to the Wall Street Journal or whatever. But now hand sanitizer is a requirement, Then the next piece is social distancing, obviously helps with, that arm's length or arm's reach or whatever you want to call it, those 7 to 15 yards that you need to, have some level of control of your client over. So I think that makes it a little bit easier. And then for those folks who are doing low pro and covert, it might make it a little bit more challenging because there's, less people to blend in with. But again, as protectors will adapt, and we train those folks to adapt. And I think the new folks coming in the industry get an everyday sample of that, just having to, meet the school's requirements or whatever's happening. So I don't think it's anything that's setting the world on fire. I think, but as we go, we'll kind of find a balance between what we need. And I think the interesting thing is because the companies are setting the standards, right? Like your essentially your client will set the standards. Protectors will have to kind of shift from point to point to point on those standards, and we'll probably hear a little bit more about who's doing what that people like and who's doing what that seems to be difficult,
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, if you're a supplier or you're a small team and you're not getting anything from hire or from a client, like sitting down and saying, like, well, what are our standards? What does a clean room mean to us, or a clean car, or a clean vehicle? Sorry. And then how do we, it's just like TSCM. Okay, now once the room is cleansed, how do we secure it to make sure that, it's been that way, so we can at least tell the client, to the best of our ability and the best of our knowledge, based on CDC practices, blah, 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 and we've sealed the door. Here you go. You know,
I mean, but I think it comes back to moving away from buzzword and moving away from, like we talked about, like, oh, this is what I do for you because I'm so awesome, to more along the lines of like, hey, here's how we conduct business, which
yeah,
I think is very, very important distinction from my perspective.
totally agree. And I mean, it's not as exciting as maybe some of the other things we have done, but I do think moving forward, it's going to be a question that a lot of folks at the other end who are at the top of the food chain in terms of, where the money comes from and how everything's funded, they're going to be asking those questions like, what are you guys doing here? Or what's your team doing here? And it should be something in my mind that, again, like you said, you're either mandated it by someone else, you need to make sure you understand it, or come up with a response. So if somebody says, well, what are you doing here? You have a response that corresponds to something that others are doing, or something that aligns to CDC or something like that.
Right. Yeah. You can't be, well, Chuck and Chris said that, if you have spearmint gum in the car, it'll be awesome. Right.
Bro, science, man. It works
Yeah.
every time.
It wins the day.
Just
always.
rub chicken juice all over everything.
Yep. That's good.
That's how you clean your car and how you clean your hotel room. Chris, it was 40 years. I think this will come out on a Thursday, but it was 40 years Tuesday that Ronald Reagan had the attempted assassination by him.
Yeah.
Can you believe that? I mean, I can say I remember when.
Yeah. Jesus. Me too.
I mean, in many ways, I mean, it boils down to, threat assessment, threat management. And while we have many things have stayed the same in terms of, we have great tools like OnTech out there that will help us manage and track and keep abreast of everything that's happening in terms of how we're dealing with things. But at the end of the day, some things don't change. I mean, there's hunters, there's howlers, and there's the way we look at it. And I think it's a good reminder.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that we would have to say as an industry is that we haven't really changed anything until like SOPs or TTPs or, tactics, techniques, and procedures until something bad has happened. Right. And I would say that, since maybe 2010, 2011, we really, hadn't really done anything until then. And so, the things that changed after that were, hey, we don't publish schedules, and we're going to control the press pen, and reinforced, cover and evacuation. And then, of course, I think likely, I mean, they don't talk about it much, but solidified, especially with the presidential detail, is what happens after the attack, right? Because, in the immediate, like, couple seconds of the attack, there was a lot of things that happened that reinforced the excellent things that the Secret Service were doing. But in the expanding seconds after that, it just was a complete shit show from, the DC police and some other things. And of course, this is, 40 years ago. And I think using those attacks as review is very, very helpful. We use that attack as a case study for if-then thinking, really. I mean, cover and evacuation is great, but if-then thinking, I mean, it's a excellent study because I think Hinckley fired 5 shots, 5 or 6 shots. Yep.
6.
And the Secret Service agents are moving the president in 2, which is phenomenal, right? Like there's zero hesitation, and they're both moving. You hear pow, pow, bodies are dropping. You see, people are ducking, police officers, everybody in the immediate vicinity is having that natural response, right? And you see the excellent training that those, was it Jerry Parr and the other agent, and it bothers me because the agent that's on the right of the president is also moving and getting him in the vehicle, but the agent that was shot and then Jerry Parr, the detail leader, they're the ones who get the kudos, but they're both moving. They both get him in the vehicle, and then they both follow up. I mean, then he follows up after seeing blood on his lips, and big wins. I mean, those things justify what we do and how we do it, et cetera. I think it's important to realize.
Well, and those are things, I mean, it goes back to like what do you, if nothing else, if you have a small team and you're going to train and you're going to practice, we're talking pure tactics, pure, very pointy end of the spear right now. What do you train? Actions on, always.
Yeah. Well,
actions
I think
on, emergency, react to contact.
Yeah.
And
I
how do we do that?
I agree.
Because, well, what do we know? I mean, look, when the shit goes down, you're either going to do something or you're going to freeze. Freeze is bad. Doing something, at least you have a 50-50 chance of doing something. So let's hope it's on the 50 of the good side, because we've trained.
That'd be helpful.
And Chris and Chuck know, like, this is, I'm going to go left, you're going to go right. But you know, that whole, like, hey, I'm all things good in the hood and something happens and we freeze. I mean,
yeah. Well, so I think that, so I agree, and actions on, and that's the foundation. And I think on some level, sometimes we get away from that for some ungodly reason, right? Like we forget.
Agree.
And because we want soft approach to protection or low profile, we forget that we're protectors, right? Or we forget the foundational roles of the protector, which gets frustrating, because you don't need to cover and evacuate every Thursday. I mean, that's a low probability event, but it's what you're paid for, right? So if you're out there teaching skills to be a butler and all that other stuff, and you're overly focused on service, and a lot of times when we teach, we try to have this security service scale, right? Because if you're doing only security, then likely you're doing it wrong, right? But if you're doing only service, you're a butler, and you're likely doing it wrong as well. And when the customer pays for you, they're paying for the protector, right? And it's awesome that you have the service skills, but they're paying for a protector. So sometimes we forget that, Well, and you have to have those foundational basics, right? We're here to come with me if you want to live.
Yep.
Essentially.
I mean, it's a priorities and requirements. You're hired for the priorities. Like you say, you're hired to do those things, but sometimes it's the requirements, like being nice, dealing with these things, facilitating all. Those are the things that maybe keep you there. But at the end of the day, you're right. I mean, and we talk on the show. Sometimes when we negate the John Wick aspect of the job, but that's not to say we don't appreciate or we don't feel that that's important. It's extremely important, which is why if you've got 2 hours a week to devote to the training, you have to understand your priorities and requirements and training them accordingly. You can't miss the hard skills. Okay. But as you've said before on the show, and as we've talked about, we've got it. You should be able to do that. That's why you're here. Those soft skills are the things that you consistently have to work on, because the girl, but at the end of the day, if you think about, going back to the Reagan issue, hey, that may happen. How are you going to react? What are you going to do? Have you trained to it? You don't need to make it more nuanced than it is. Understand what it is, understand how the team's going to go, and do it again.
Right. Well, I mean, I think, they said, hey, it was just a routine thing, routine meet at the hotel, but we did it every Thursday or whatever it was. Right. And you just never know. And I think, leading into protective intelligence, like I think you had mentioned before, using ONTIC or some other protective intelligence tools, or even protective intelligence analysts, right? Understanding what can hurt you, understanding what you know, and then understanding what you don't know, but understanding your, the environment, your principles, risk profile and threat profile, all of the above, right? I would just hate to be the protector that's like, it'll never happen. I'm just here to do X, Y, and Z, and then it does happen,
And there's been a few cases lately where the howler has been brought up, or the hunter has been brought up, and it was a known element that just didn't get passed on. Mm-hmm. And I think it's indicative, or it's vital that you, as a protector, as part of your advanced work, if you're not going with an intelligence-driven, operations-led mantra, you should, you have to ask those questions. Are there issues here? Are there people? Are there anybody talking about, what's happening? And a lot of times I think people don't ask those questions because it doesn't occur to them, or they think somebody else is taking care of it.
Well, okay, I'm going to call it, or they think that their presence on the environment will be enough to handle it at the end of the day. Now, your presence makes the principal safer, right? Immediately, without any advances, without, I mean, if you're trained, and I'm going to say trained, and I'm going to say trained again for protection, your presence helps if you're trained. But if you're not trained and or if you're, not, well, if you're not trained, your presence doesn't do anybody any good, right? I mean,
potentially
I guess
makes it worse.
It could be. Yeah, it could make it worse. Exactly. And then you build on that with, situational awareness and understanding what's going on in your environment and protective intelligence and your advances and all that other stuff. Like all of those things increase the possibility and probability of if there was an attack, a successful outcome, right?
Yeah.
And I'll say attack in terms of, freaking death or full on, full scale 2 or 3 people coming or, flour or, hate speech or, somebody throwing crap or whatever the case is, right, from an attack. So, or a milkshake,
pie to the face.
Yeah, milkshake. Yeah. So all of those things. And those are great examples. I mean, man, that's such a good case study. The milkshake in the UK,
gosh,
where the principal is like, I hired you specifically for that task.
Yeah.
And that's the only, and he's like, you could see it coming from a mile away.
I ask you to do one thing.
Pretty much.
One thing.
Yeah. And you feel, and I feel bad for that guy, for the AIC or the, PSO, close protection officer, because it I mean, it is his fault. He's the last line of defense, right? But again, it's a team effort, and you can see, unfortunately, people are just focused on at least at a snapshot in time that we get in reviewing that, focus on the wrong thing.
Well, and the other, like if you think about, go back to like the pie incident with Gates back in, what was it, 95 or whatever, it's a myth that he had security with him. He did not. The gentleman that you see there is actually a public relations agent. But, what do we have now that we didn't have then? That's a pie. Now we have 3D printed guns.
Well, yeah, there's that.
Now we have the ability to produce we have the ability to produce casualty. We can produce weapons in our own home. We can produce weapons that will cause, massive issues from our own home, as opposed to like, hey, here's a custard pie. I don't like you. Now we can say, well, hey, guess what? I have a plastic weapon and I'm going to do harm to you. Again, that's not a political statement. It's just reality.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say oftentimes I have a hard time with protectors who are like, all about the gun, but then they want to say that, other guns are risks or whatever the case is. And it's definitely politicized, right? I mean, I don't have any time or space for that. We have to be, in our personal lives, we can be political, but in our risk assessment and threat assessments, we have to look at whatever those threats are, right? So, whether laws are passed, whatever, how does that impact the principal? How does that impact, the threat environment? How does that impact, access? How does that impact, crazy people getting, all that stuff? And so the 3D guns, it can be an issue, right? I think to get political for a second is, not really, I mean, just as an example, is you see all of the guns that we have in America, and the fact that gun crime is infinitesimal is crazy, right? And that's not really political, that's just a fact.
Yeah.
But then again, as a protector, you see all the guns we have in America, and you see the percentages and the threat that it can cause, and you have to address the threat. You can't just like politicize and go, well, I'm a 2A guy, so anybody who has a gun is good for me, good enough for me. Like, no, it doesn't work like that, So we have to look at those threats, but politicizing is kind of asinine.
We're agnostic about threat. We hate it all, and we question everything. So, and I think when I think about things like 3D weapons that are printed, I just look at it as like one more risk we have to think about. It's not to say like who in this audience could have printed a 3D weapon. All of them. Right. So how does that just now we have the ability of somebody to maybe go out and use a 3D printer to produce something. Now we have COVID. now we have, all these, now I have to be 6 feet apart because maybe my principal has said, hey, I'm very concerned about that. And then we have somebody in the audience that's maybe a hunter or a howler, and they've gone from howler to hunter. We have to consider that. We know, it just makes it all more complex. I mean, and that is I think that is the plight of the protector, but it's also the thing that sets us apart from other folks in the security industry is like, we're consistently thinking about risk management from moment to moment, from like pattern development, like if you think about like, say, cyber or intel, like we're looking at pattern development over a long period of time. The protector has to go out and immediately see and assess patterns in the crowd, patterns in movement, patterns in many things, and then say, okay, anomaly, what are we doing? Anomaly, what are we doing?
You have to establish the baseline for the area, and then you've got to figure out like how to cut out all the white noise and actually look for the things that are different, right? Which is the same thing that the cyber folks do, but they have a longer period of time, which is look at it and they can look, it's not necessarily in your face, and not that it's any less critical, especially at this point, but it is definitely different, and I think we'll have some exciting times. Well, specifically, I think people are going to be busy.
Well, and I think you and I are both. By the time this airs Thursday, and I think you and I are both on a panel on a Fellam's conference on Friday, are we not?
Yeah, the modernization of corporate security.
Yeah, that's going to be. Yeah, I think it's going to be a great conversation. That, this is probably one of the things we'll talk about. I mean, if you think about it in terms of like, how things keep changing, there's the whole, Talem's thing about black swans and how, they really shouldn't exist because we should be looking at them. I mean, it's just, the task is daunting, but it's one that I think if you're in the protection industry, I mean, you kind of love it in a terrible way. Like the idea of like, I'm consistently looking at risk and patterns and developing courses of action. It's almost like the Terminator. Like you see the thing and you have all the responses going on in your head and you're just picking the right one, and it's just happening. Why you're doing the job.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, from my perspective, it's about to be the corporate Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. And I hope it's not, but it could be. As everybody transitions back to, freaking social, from being social distanced and from being on their own and doing their own thing, and not having to wear pants and all these other things. Now you're telling me what to do, and I just had to sit in traffic the whole way, and I had a freaking, and I've done, I freaking had to flip off all these people, and I hate sitting in traffic, and all that shit, all the domestic violence that was at home, during the pandemic is going to shift its way right back to work, and everybody's going to be very stressed out. So I think corporate security folks are going to be, and law enforcement and protective agents are going to be. Hopefully not, but I think they're going to be busy, as we just, level out a little bit.
Just operating in places like San Francisco and Seattle, completely different than it was 24 months ago. And, now, we, with just unrest and civil unrest in pandemic and everything else, I mean, you're right. I mean, and on top of that, now we've gone from, hey, everyone's pushed out to the edge, and now we have workplace violence manifesting at home and other places. Now, hey, kids, we're going to go back to a hybrid. Yeah. And now we're going to have people who've just got used to working at home. Now they have to work back at the office. We've got to figure out office politics again, all kinds of things, and accessibility to CEOs and to luminaries. And it's definitely going to be the playoffs for sure.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's going to be, I think, talking to Will Geddes and Spencer Corson, threat management is really going to be likely the theme for the next year or so.
Yeah, for sure. And I think going back and revisiting, especially both of those. I mean, we just had Spencer on a couple. What was it, last week?
Yeah, last week.
And then, Will was earlier in he's like towards the beginning of this season. Well worth going back and listening to Will's conversation on threat management. I mean, and you're right. I mean, protectors need to understand the TATM role. They need to understand some of the things that are going on. Mental health is an issue. I wish I could say, hey, here's the fix. You and I aren't going to come up with that fix. We just have to understand what the implications are around it and what that means for the folks that we've been retained to protect.
Yeah. And I think that threat assessment, threat management piece is very valuable. As a matter of fact, I got to say it. So it's known that I teach for ESI, for the protective operations piece. But
what?
Yeah. I think one of the coolest parts of that I have the opportunity to be a part of is their threat assessment, threat management program, which I think sets itself. I don't know of any place in the nation aside from the federal government that puts one on at the entry level that like that program is. And MEB West has done a very, very good job with that. And it looks like, I don't know, it's incredible. And if anybody gets the opportunity to go see it or be a part of it, or at least, hit up MEB and, or even ESI to have the class or have it brought out, it's phenomenal.
Yeah. And it nothing else. I mean, we're big fans of the IPSB, both you and I.
I don't know
but
why.
Also like ATAP, Association of Threat Assessment Professionals. If you're a protector and you don't know what ATAP is, and you haven't gone out there and looked at it, highly recommend. I mean, and that's another place where you can get great training, and that's a great place to network for that crowd at. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. And there's some phenomenal threat assessment professionals that, all over the globe that contribute to, all of, threat assessment tools and thought leadership and techniques and procedures. It's funny as we talk about this, the challenging pieces, we start thinking about these silos now, or I'm actually seeing silos, right? You got cyber, then you got, I'm a protector. I only work within, 7 to 15 yards of the principal, or maybe a little bit further. And then I'm a siloed protective intelligence person. Now I'm a siloed, threat assessment person. As you talk about IPSB, I mean, we need to freaking get all these folks together in one room and start, freaking do some
common
training.
Operating information, man. Yep. Everybody I think the thing about the protector is that generalist who says, we have an issue. I know enough about all these things to say, hey, I can handle it at this level, but when do I need to call somebody else in? Like, okay, we have an issue. It's a person of interest. It's a person of interest. It's now doing X, Y, Z. Okay, we need to go to a colleague who is going to do an assessment on this and tell us something. Or this person is or we've realized there's a breach in the supply chain. I know enough to know that it's somewhere. Okay, let's go call a cyber folks. Or, and I think that's the role as I see the protector moving forward, is really that key synchronization point. That says, look, I take in all risks. We're going to absorb the risk, figure it out, deal with it here, or figure out how we need to engage someone else to do it. And I think the protector is that center point for information that creates that common operating information of which we can work, that says, look, I'm going to take this cyber element that says this is a code read from the strontium group. And then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to talk to threat assessment folks. They're going to say, this is a level 1. And then in my mind, I've interpreted and said, folks, when I take all this in, it's a high level risk. We need to go talk to the principal, or we need to do something. Or you're saying this, it's a medium level risk. We're going to wait and we're going to, watch, or it's low. We're just going to monitor. But I agree. That's our role.
I'm glad that you clarified that, because initially I thought you were talking about the concept that Christian West and I think Jared had come up with, that, what do they call it? The technical executive protection agent, or
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? He just did a thing on it today. I saw it on LinkedIn, but I don't think that's.
No,
Go
that's
ahead.
not what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you clarified because I hate to say it, but that's not good enough, right? You knowing just enough and then going, oh, I got to call somebody else. Not good enough, right? We're already behind the power curve. We realize we should realize we're behind the power curve, especially with solar winds and all these other things. We have to get better. We have to get faster. And to almost, when I said faster, almost to quote or to follow McChrystal's focus, where you're just trying to outpace, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have to be able to try to do that in order to meet these threats. And the challenging piece is that they're digital. So and I don't even like that word.
Well,
they're in the cyberspace, and you have to be
it's a
able to
domain.
replicate that faster, right? Exactly.
I mean, we're physical domain.
Well put, sir.
It's physical domain, digital domain. And the thing at the end of the day is we've got to have enough understanding. I mean, this isn't Chris and I saying, hey, guys and gals, go out and become a cyber expert. I mean, look, you need to know enough to understand like what's the capacity, what's the capabilities, what constitutes an issue, what doesn't constitute an issue. I mean, and it all goes back to that, common operating information stuff again. The stuff that Christian and Jared, I think, were talking about. I mean, the Secret Service was doing that 5 or 6 years ago, where they were saying, look, we're going to bring somebody in that's not cyber focused, they're wireless focused. They're that digital footprint that's going to come in and say, what's on the Bluetooth that the president's speaking at, who's managing this, who's managing the IoT. But I agree with you, Chris. It's really taking that at an additional step and saying, let's conceptualize what's going on here, consume risk, and then interpret it to that common language that we can all say, hey, look, cyber, threat assessment, event security, EP, risk insurers or whatever. Here's where we can come together and talk about this, and here's what we need to make it happen. And I think that's where we are as protectors, is we're the extreme mitigators, if you will, and we're course of action development folks. Like, okay, got it. We're gonna catalog it internally. We're gonna figure out what we're gonna do with it. We're gonna come up with the courses of action. We're gonna present the courses of action. We're gonna say which one we think is the most likely, and then we're gonna move forward, as opposed to just waiting like that rabbit in the middle of the road to get hit.
Yeah, I'll just respond accordingly. Yeah, no, that's not good enough.
It's, if you think about it, think about when you and I got into the industry, I don't know, 5 years ago.
Exactly.
How different it's changed in, the load, the intellectual load that a protector is asked to carry right now. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, especially when you think about, most teams are usually onesie twosies, but
I go back. Yeah.
doing it correctly, you can add a lot of value. You can bring a lot of value,
Well, I mean, I think about when I talked to Martin at IPSB last time we met, and then we had him, we featured that on the pod, and him just saying, look, I'm a one-man show. I've been hired. Now I need to figure out how to force multiply everything in my periphery to make this work. And that's a story that rings true and true again now here. Like, hey, I'm here for a moment. I need to go and talk to these cyber folks or digital folks. I need to go and engage all these folks, and I need to be able to talk. I don't have a lot of time, so I need to be able to know just enough of the language to engage them, to bring them into my domain, to say, let's meet here at the borders so we can talk about this risk.
Yeah. And that's the multi-use and the leverage that the solo practitioner has to bring, right? I mean, you kind of can't do it on your own.
Well, and you see it at ESI when you're training new folks coming in the industry. I mean, it's no longer just shoot. It's no longer just shoot, move, or it's no longer just like, hold bags and here you go. I mean, it's everything. It's consistent. It's a learn. I've always loved it because I feel a good protector And a good practitioner is a lifelong learner. I mean, it's very Musashi. That goes back to like episode 1 or 2 of this podcast. But
yeah,
I mean, it's probably a required task.
well, I would say you have to be, because the freaking the threat decides to do whatever it's going to do. So if you're still doing your 19, insert whatever the other two numbers are, TTPs, you're going to get freaking mown over like a freaking,
Yeah.
like that was your job, and that's just not awesome, right?
Yeah.
And I think we had, we had a discussing that on a Clubhouse. We're like, hey, and I talked to Bill. Bill Peeler brought this up, and he's like, well, the trainers need to tell us what, set the standard. And that's not, he said, he later clarified, that's not really what I was saying. Is they just have to be on board so that they can execute what the industry needs, right? But 3-car motorcade, right? If you're doing that, right, like that's a moneymaker, right? I can add 4, 5, 6 extra bodies and do the course and keep them involved. And at the end of the day, likely you will never, you never say never and never say always, but never see it. And it's not practical, right? And when you see government details running 1 and 2 cars, you kind of get the understanding that like, maybe we don't do that anymore, or maybe we don't need to do that. No, I need to understand it just in case. And likely that just in case is if a 1 and a 2 car or 2 car motorcades happen to become a 4 car because our 2 principals are having to walk on a street or having a meeting or doing whatever, they decide to ride in their own car. So you have to figure out how to integrate that. But beyond that, any school that you go to that's teaching that 3-car motorcade is probably missing the point. And if you wonder that,
they've monetized the syllabus, and they're just
they've
trying to get
monetized the 3rd car. They've monetized that lead vehicle.
What was it when my favorite Simpsons episode, when Homer becomes the mayor's bodyguard? He goes to the training course, and the guy goes, "Congratulations, your check's cleared. You all passed."
Pretty much, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny. I mean, Danny talked about it today, right? You get a certificate that says Danny so-and-so, and it's freaking awesome. And you better help that guy's awesome, because you're staking your claim to it, And I think the funny thing about most instruction is how do you know? Oh, it's the best training I've ever had. Great. How do you know? I mean, I'll ask you that, even if you took a class from me, like, how do you know? You've not seen it done in the field. You just think that that it's awesome because you just did it.
And also, most likely, it's the only training class you've ever been to.
From a protective, in protection, or some folks that's all they've ever done, But most folks that have been through the mill or law enforcement or some other, driving or whatever, training course, what did you learn? So,
I learned a J turn.
Holding ourselves to a standard. Well, nobody ever has a bad day in a driving school,
No, I would say, honestly, any driving is awesome, just because you walk away and you feel like you feel awesome, like Steve McQueen or Fast and Furious for the younger set.
Right. But more importantly, you have a skill set now that you can use immediately, and it will stay with you. And oh, by the way, you're behind the wheel of a car, your principal's car, driving for those folks. What is it? I don't know. I can't even calculate the percentage more than you will be in a gunfight,
Well, and like you said, you are walking with a skill that you can use for your family, for you, defensive driving, is something you can take away right away. There's a place right here, not too far from where I live, called Dirtfish. And they do off-road, and there's a lot of teams up here in the Northwest that will go out there and they'll use their track, and they'll take their SUVs or they'll take their cars. And I mean, you walk away from Dirtfish, if you have a 4-wheel drive or you have you're going to walk away immediately with skill sets. I mean, because their course will test you. In fact, I've been trying to figure out a way to get my Gladiator out there and just run it on the course. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, do I think it's going to help me in a protective model? I don't think it's not going to help me. I mean, I don't think it's going to help me tomorrow, but when I went, I walked away. I mean, you do walk away with relevant skills. And to be honest, they do have courses that are directly relatable to security, but they're general, like off driving courses and things like that. Yeah, of course, for the Middle East or Afghanistan or something. But
Right.
if I'm driving downtown Seattle, it's just like, hey, I learned how to do a J turn. Yeah, that's probably not going to help you out in Afghanistan. It may or may not help you out in LA traffic. I mean, it's cool, but
yeah, but
I digress.
I think, but those are relevant skills, right? Like, what should you do? Should you go to the range for freaking, a 5-day course or whatever? Or should you maybe, do a driving course, which sets you apart and it gives you another skill set for your, and you're always going to be behind the wheel.
Or
right?
do you do a medical course, Chris?
Yeah. You got that too, right?
I mean, the thing is, at the end of the day, there's really no right answer to that. Part of it goes back to Gary Drake. If you go back and listen to that interview with him, like, know what you're doing in your role and what you need to go.
Right.
I would argue
there's also
that
balance for each role. I would say.
Generically driving, absolutely. I would probably, that would be in my top, because you're right. That is a skill. I mean, how many times do you hear the word, like, I need a security driver? I mean, we could argue the semantics of security driver. Is it a thing? Is it not a thing? Let's put that aside for a minute. I mean, there's a lot of details where you're hired to drive. So, I mean, immediately a skill you can
I don't
use.
think I'm not going to call it a semantic thing. I would say my expectation, if you're a security driver, that doesn't mean you're a security person who sits behind a steering wheel. I categorically no, right? Because how is that any different than I was a law enforcement officer, or I was a soldier, or a freaking, whatever, and now I'm a protector? You're untrained. You're untrained for that role. So no. If you're a security driver, you have to have security driver training. You can have protective training, but you have to have security driver training. And if you go to a law enforcement driving course, that is not the same thing as a security driving course.
Yeah, agree.
Yes. So I think we have to stop making excuses for what our past roles were and freaking say, you know what, this is the role I want. I need to just be able to step into it. And I would argue that shoot, move, communicate, medicate, not in those orders, and some other rate, not operate, but security stuff,
mitigate,
right? Formations. Yeah, mitigate. There we go. Good times. Foundational requirement for you to step into the role. Those are what people expect. And we laugh, we make fun of it, but your principal, when they look at you, they expect you to be a Navy SEAL or John Wick or whatever, right? That's the expectation. That's why they're paying gadzooks amount of money a day for your freaking ass to be there.
Well, they expect you to be a protector.
Caffeine.
That's what they expect. They expect you to be a bodyguard. Whatever their perception of a bodyguard is, they expect you to be that. Whether it's John Wick, whether it's Frank Farmer, whether it's whatever insert movie here, or whether it's something they maybe back when I did work for James Baker and Norman Schwarzkopf and Powell and all. I mean, they were informed. They were informed by crews on the military or Department of Defense or State Department, though, so what is the principal's perception of that protector? So they expect you to be that protector.
Yes. And guess who else expects you to be that?
We do.
Well, we do, but the dude who's stroking the check, right? Because I got a freaking skill sets, no skill sets, freaking half skill sets, and then freaking my freaking cousin Vinny, and freaking they all get billed out at the same rate.
Yep.
So
it's all right, my friend. It's all right. By the way, I'm going to change subjects for a minute because I don't want to forget to talk about this tonight. Did you happen to see the, I think it was in Task and Purpose, the Air Force now has a unmanned robot dog guard, a robot guard dog.
Yeah, I saw that.
all I could think about was family, family security. I mean, it's interesting because I actually read, I stopped and I was like, that's interesting. I read the whole article.
Yeah.
And it's semi-autonomous. So it does require somebody manage it. But I was thinking like, okay, sometimes what we see in the military will eventually make its way in the private sector. And I was thinking, okay,
Right.
your family home office, you have a big estate or something like that. I can see a day when you have these semi-autonomous, dogs, for lack of a better term, that have like
Packs
360. Yeah, they have
animals.
360 degrees sensors and stuff on them where they're patrolling because they can go in places and look at things you can't. I mean, I don't think they're going to replace protectors or anything else, but particularly for family home offices or, for the more like security set where you have to have a routine patrol in somewhere
large
that
government or corporate sites, that makes sense.
Just
although I saw
crazy.
a thing today with these like freaking, they must have been 220 pounds if they were a pound, cane corsos that were trying to there's like 3 or 4 of them trying to bust down this gigantic fence. I was like, well, robot dogs or those, because those things are badass.
Yeah.
I would say that, for every bit of technology, there's a there's a yin and a yang to each, right? So, how do you defeat it? I would say, likely you're going to be able to hear the thing coming, but once you get that piece sorted out, you add some sensors on that thing. Again, I think it's just a force multiplier to the human user, if you will, but it's interesting where we're going with that stuff.
Wow. And also thinking about it from the aggressor point of view. Yeah, you can hear it coming. But what kind of payload can you put on that sucker?
Oh yeah, do like a freaking minigun and then a drone swarm to provide air support. It'd be pretty awesome.
I mean, drone swarms I think are very interesting, and I remember when people were talking about them, several years ago, and I got a few briefings on them, and then as we move forward, I mean, again, all things that protectors need to think about, that how does that, how does this digital stuff, or how do these, innovative actions affect me moving forward? It's just amazing. I mean, also, in some ways kind of cool from the protector side, like, hey, it's just a force multiplier, like you say, but then if you look at it, put your red team hat on and go, well, that's potentially very frightening as well, in terms of just having one of those suckers run up on you with, what was it we were talking about last month? 10 pounds of C4 went missing. What if it showed up on one of those suckers and walked up on your car or next to your detail? And
right. Well, what if
happy
that,
birthday.
On the flip side, if it could be controlled, it could be hacked. So
absolutely.
So now I just, you say whatever that thing's armed with, and then you just turn it around and freaking roll it through the CP and freaking make sure you get that thing on video so you can watch the YouTube video, So there's a balance to everything. So it'll be interesting.
So we've been on Clubhouse lately. We've had a great set of crew coming on that we're talking about deeper things than we hit on the podcast. We've talked about quality metrics. We've talked about value chains. What are some things we have coming up, Chris, that's exciting there?
Well, I think the first thing that's exciting is just the level of expertise that we get in the room, right? And then bring on the stage and the conversation we have. I mean, and the representation that we have. And I think the second thing that's interesting is what those folks bring to the table, right? Who they represent, what they bring to the table, in terms of emotional intelligence, all the soft skills piece and the management and those management skills, and all of those folks that we've talked to are right about the middle, getting ready to be directors and stuff like that. So that becomes really, really exciting. I think that the next thing we'll likely talk about is we were supposed to be talking about quality control, quality management last time, and that kind of evolved into a standards conversation. I think that
that's common for sure.
Yeah, it is, and it's inevitable, right? I really think back to, and I know I'm not answering your question here, but I really think back to, I know Dave Johnson at one time had tried to create a standard, and I know that some other folks out of Missouri, had the University of Missouri trying to create a standard, and it makes me think about all these disparate groups again. And I'm just talking about protectors. These disparate groups who have all tried to do something, and everybody's just kind of like trying to do something. I think we all need to get our freaking heads together and get on that, common page.
I think the thing that's hopeful now is, before, I think groups were trying to do something and they wanted to stick, like, I want you to do what I'm doing, I'm going to stick our name on it. And
Yeah.
I sense that, you've got 3 or 4 big organizations, nonprofits or whatnot, that are behind saying, look, we just want to get benchmark standards, whatever we want to call them, out there, so that, we have a spot to start working from.
Yeah.
And I'm sensing that. And, in my time in the industry, it's the first time I've ever sensed like an agnostic look at this, that's being spearheaded, and you got CEPLC, you've got IPSB, you got as is EP Council, or what they're calling that now. And then you've got several, companies also stepping up saying, we'll be part of that.
Right.
And we'll figure that out.
Well, then the other thing is I think that we see is everybody's trying to find their space, right?
Yeah.
Usually. But what we're seeing now is people have found their space and they found their niche in what they're trying to do, and they're comfortable with that. And I think from my perspective, as I look at it, it's like, hey, great. You take that, you become the master of that entry level, right? You become the mastery of that intermediate level. You become the master of that advanced level, right?
Yep.
And then bring all of those folks together and go, okay, great. It almost falls in line with, what are you teaching? What are you teaching? What are you teaching them? What gaps are there? How do we fill those gaps? How do we connect it? Make sure he's operating on the same common operating picture. And then we just create the standard from there. And I think everybody wins with that. And we all win, to include the customer, right? And it's just ready to identify. And it'll be painful, because, some people will piss and moan because I was whatever, but it is what it is,
Well, and I think at the end of the day, there'll be a lot more people now that will say, like, look, put your ego, sit down, be quiet. And if you want to keep teaching what you're doing, that's fine. There'll always be a spot. Yeah. But the greater good is going to move forward. Right. But again, I mean, tying it back to Clubhouse, I mean, those are the kind of conversations we're having over there. I mean, who knew Monday night would be either that controversial or that intellectual, but they are. Yeah.
Well, I think the hard part of it is value, right? Everybody wants to bring value. Yeah. I think the customer gets a say, but the problem is that the customer isn't necessarily that educated in terms of what to ask for, depending on what
know from their perception.
Right. Well, and that's like, oh, so you're like, the guy on Man on Fire, or whatever it is that the perception is. And we need to educate them on, here's what you get, here's what that means, here's what you pay, and here's what that looks like. And I think everybody wins if we do it that way. And we'll get some pushback, but eventually, we can't go with the old special snowflake. Nobody understands me because I'm unique.
No,
find another spot.
Got to explain. We've got to explain. We've got to talk about what we do, and we got to talk about it in more terms than just as you might say, the John Wick skills of the room.
And I think that's probably the next discussion. As we'll throw down the gauntlet, which will be, common operating information and common operating picture. At the client level, the vendor level, and the individual level. And probably common language, right? Essentially.
Yeah. I mean, it all boils together. I mean, you got to have common operating information that leads to common operating language, that leads to a common operating picture, that leads to, intelligence requirements and all the scenario, blah, 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 blah. And I mean, in the thing that I love about the Clubhouse stuff is, like, all you and I are really doing is facilitating that conversation. We have so many people in there that have a broad skills and broad knowledge base and broad experiential base, that it often takes on a life of its own. For something that's only supposed to go an hour, it tends to go a little longer, just because it takes that long to, like, get out the ideas that come out quickly.
Yeah. Well, I think so. We have been facilitating conversation. I think in the future we're shifting to driving the conversation, just because
it's grown quite a bit too.
It's growing, and right, and just and really just trying to make sure that we maintain the topic too. But again, I think
it will go off the rails if we let
quickly,
it. But again, it's a conversation. That's a great thing I think about Clubhouse. There's some other folks, Elijah's doing some great stuff on Clubhouse, and he and his crew are kicking. I saw Michael Julian I wasn't able to attend what they were doing, but I saw Michael Julian and Spencer were on doing something the other day. I don't know if you were able to get on that one and see it, or
I was able to join in, and I was in the audience. I'd had a really crappy cell signal, so I wasn't able to, do much more than that. But it sounded like they were having a really good conversation there, and Michael was very gracious and complimentary. So thank you so much.
And that's the thing. It's what a great time.
Right.
What a great
Everybody's
time.
doing it. It's just I don't want to see us jockeying for position. I want to see us getting together, getting our heads together, saying, hey, cool, here's my space. And I'm like, cool, that's your space, right?
Yeah.
Roll with it. But let's figure out where we can all work together and elevate the industry as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. So what else do we have coming up? I know we've got a few interesting, we've got Klefsky coming up. We've got an interview with Caleb Gilbert on the pipes.
Yep.
We're going to be talking 100 deadly skills next month. So be on the lookout for that. That'll be an awesome interview, and we're still building towards that episode 100 coming up in a few months. So
I don't know when it's coming. I think we're also building towards we're going to do a first season break too, aren't we?
We are, and we have I don't want to give anything away on that, but we have a really cool idea that we've been talking to some folks about on that. And I think it's one that people will find, I think our audience will love. I will love, and I think it's going to be fun.
Yeah. So we had some really cool conversations come up. We got some agreements with a lot of cool folks who've agreed to come on the podcast. It's just a matter of if we can get them on, and I think, I think it's exciting because we're talking about people who are doing some things that have been around for a very, very long time that we've already talked about, but that are applying technology, applying standards to what they do, being able to go, hey, look, here's your grade at this, right? Here's where you lie in terms of overall, like think about top gear, the STIG or whatever the case is. So some really exciting things and some exciting impact for the industry. So yeah, we got that going for us.
Awesome. Well, I think with that, sir, we'll move to close on this Wednesday Eve, as they say. So yeah, this has been Hump Day with Conversations in Close Protection Recording. My name is Chuck Randolph, and as always, across the digital divide has been the expeditionary Mr. Chris Story.
You know what? It's funny. We record audio, but we use the freaking video, and I forgot that this is supposed to be YouTube, and I could actually.
Okay, I'll do that again.
One of those numbers.
Wait a minute. The expeditionary, Mr. Chris Story.
Thank you very much.
Pause for effect. All right. With that, wash your hands, watch your six, and keep your heads down.
Good times.
You've been listening to an episode of Conversations in Close Protection. Email us at protectiontalk@outlook.com and find us on your preferred podcast platform. Please take a moment and consider rating us to help others find Conversations in Close Protection too. Look for us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and other social media spots. Conversations in Close Protection is brought to you by your hosts Chuck Randolph and Chris Story. Our engineering editor is the mighty Aaron Peck. Please remember that all opinions expressed do not represent those of any organizations or companies the hosts are affiliated with. This is Rachel saying watch your six and keep your heads down.